Good morning. All right. Well, I guess I should probably say greetings because I'm not for sure everywhere that we are broadcasting from on this Rise and Shine Sundays is it actually morning, but welcome. My name is Jamie Rich. I'm your host. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I extend a warm welcome and an invitation to an experiment. For those of you who are new here, we're not a podcast. We are an interactive talk show. We're not here to give you answers or to tell you what to do. We're here to give you space for inquiry, to explore questions that might offer a shift in your life. And each week when we gather, we have sort of a central question. And this week's central question is who supports your path forward and who doesn't? And so I invite you as we begin to have this discussion today, those of you who are maybe joining us in the conversation chat in YouTube, your participation in this is the central reason why we're here. We're going to, in this next time that we are together, um, talk about the different aspects of who supports your path forward and who doesn't. And with me to help have this conversation with us this morning, is my good friend, Ray Guillot. Welcome, Ray.
Hey, Jamie.
And I see people are already responding to us in the chat this morning. Ray was with us last week when we began our first episode with an inquiry last week, which was how we end a chapter shapes what comes next. And we talked about giving ourselves permission to complete 2025 properly before rushing into 2026. So this week, we're kind of continuing that conscious closing with a question that might feel uncomfortable for some people, but I think it's necessary because when you're examining your life and when you're kind of looking at things in the year ahead, I think it's okay to begin to look back to recognize some of the people who started the journey with you last year may not be the ones who are walking with you in 2026. This conversation sort of began organically in can't remember if you were at the meeting that I was at, Ray, when there was a gentleman that was talking about how he was looking forward to 2026, but one of the things that he was very aware of was that there were all of these people and all these experiences that he'd had in the last year, and he realized that for 2026 he sort of had to reorient himself, like, and he literally was just saying, I'm not so sure the same people that I was working with in 2025 are going to be the people that I'm working with in 2026. And so there's all that grief, and then there's that, the concern because you don't know exactly who's going to show up in your life. Have you found some of those things to be true for you, Ray, as you've looked forward into this coming year?
Oh, absolutely. I love the question because, and the example that you just referenced is excellent because um, things are continuously changing around us,
Mm-hmm.
and we're changing, and the people that we have relationships with are changing. So the question becomes, is there still that level of interest to follow whatever path we're on as individuals? So it's interesting to look at what are those patterns and what do they mean and how you're going to respond because you know, you've got lots to share today, so I think I'll stop there. But it's there's always something to talk about, and with
There
our
is.
with our experiment here, if
Right.
somebody wants to guide the discussion, please type it
Yeah.
in the YouTube.
Yeah, because again, one of the things that I love about this particular forum and choosing to do this type of conversation live is that we want to be able to take the inquiry that you are expressing, and like I said, you can just simply put it in the chat, and we'll be able to use that as part of the conversation. Um, but it's hard because we're part of the reason why it's difficult for people to look back into their past year is that sometimes they see the things that failed, right? The things that didn't quite work. And it's hard because we're taught that, well, if we have a relationship with someone, we should do our best to try to improve it. but sometimes you actually begin to realize that sacred contracts that you may have signed with someone, or the particular journey that you've been on with somebody, maybe that's been completed. And maybe they're not the person that's intended to walk forward with you into the new year. And it's kind of, again, going back to giving ourselves the permission slip to not only ask the question, right, but to be uncomfortable a little bit and just not knowing, but following that sort of inner compass forward. So it's not all. This isn't about making people wrong. I want to make sure I'm real clear about that, because I know that for myself, I saw a number of the relationships that I had had in 2025 related to my work were, wait a second, if someone is not necessarily interested in moving forward, like there's a lot of forward energy going on right now. There's also a lot of destructive and decay happening around us, right? And sometimes you can stay here if that's what you think your role is. But if you're moving on with something in your life, it's really important that you look to finding a kind of a new tribe to run with, right?
Oh, definitely. I think what's really interesting is failures really is just a singular area of a bigger picture or a bigger situation.
Right.
I prefer looking at it, well, what did I learn?
Hmm.
What did I experience? And what am I learning from people's behaviors or people's support or lack of support?
Hmm.
Well, what does it tell me other than the immediate reaction of it's a positive or negative experience? So I like to look at, okay, so why is that happening?
Yeah, no, that's great. And again, oftentimes it's very hard for us to ask why questions about things that are going on, because we need to also come up with some kind of definitive answer, right? And instead of what you and I have been talking about, one of the things that we're doing with this is just simply asking yourself the questions, right? And it's okay. It's not just who showed up, but it's who stayed. It's recognizing that there's certain people in your life that give you energy, and some people take it. And it's being able to sort of examine that idea, um, because the we use a term here at Rise and Shine Sundays called modernity. Sort of I keep saying, Ray, we have to put together a glossary of terms, that so that people understand it. But modernity is the sort of mechanical system that we live under right now, and we know that there's a lot of things in the current way in which we do things that don't like it when people don't have answers. You're supposed to be able to say, well, it's January 1st, 2026. What are you doing? Where are you going? And there's all this pressure to build something new, instead of allowing yourself the breathing space to be able to ask yourself questions that can inform yourself as you're going forward.
I'm not sure what to add to
Well,
that.
what if we just started to take a look at something about, um, what often happens when you're looking around for people to support you is the answer to that question may be, well, I don't know who that is right now, right? And what begins to set in sometimes when we're looking at our own lives in terms of where we want to go in a new direction, there can be this sense of aloneness that creeps in, right? Well, I don't know. So I'm just going to stay with who I've got, and even though I have these ideas and things I'd like to do, I feel much more comfortable staying here, and I certainly don't want to be alone in my new quest, right? And I have a very good friend of mine, that I walk with a bunch of other old guys at the gym, and he was saying to me something this week. He didn't. Again, I always kind of pick up these question clues, from other people. But he was mentioning how a lot of times when people want to do something, um, they get overwhelmed by the options that are ahead of them, right? And that aloneness feeds on itself. But one of the things that he said that was important for people to do in a time when they were reflecting was to join a movement. Joining a support group may be helpful as well, but joining a movement, the idea of getting involved with something that is in motion, whether or not that's maybe it could be a physical class, a physical exercise class, something which is about moving forward, right? And again, I thought that that was an interesting thing to apply here, which is, you know, you you can get caught in this trap when you're asking yourself who supports your path forward and who doesn't, of being able to think, well, gosh, there's no one who does, again, and that I'm going to have to build that ecosystem myself moving forward. But if you could join something, a study, a group that is about that moving forward, whatever that um, advancing energy may be about, a study, a guide, an exercise, the whole process of what's the word I want to say? What's the opposite of entropy, right? The idea that you're going to place yourself and borrow the benefits of something, a group activity or a pursuit that is about moving forward. And if anybody in the chat has any insights about that, just weigh in. Say, Jamie, you're way off guard, or let Ray do more talking. Anything that you'd like to hear us do. Um, well, and we have a wonderful friend here that we can say that the producer of the Breakthrough Show Network, Jessica Dugas herself, we love movement forward, and we love you too, Jessica. Thank you so very much. And I think that one of the things that we forget is that we don't have to do all of this work ourselves. We can borrow the benefits when we're looking about who may be able to support us moving forward, right? When I even had this idea about possibly doing a program for people of our age who were looking at ways that they were still curious about things, um, Jessica and I had never discussed this idea as a possibility, right? But I knew that she had a network of things that was moving forward, other people who were sharing ideas. And so rather than trying to park this particular Rise and Shine Sundays program in its own little ecosystem, we came into the Breakthrough Show Network. Um, and the great thing about that is I didn't have to do it alone, right? And I knew that she was moving forward, so I could borrow that. We could borrow the benefits of that and help it move forward. Um, so, responses to that, Ray?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. What I found interesting in what you just shared is the minute you start engaging
Mm-hmm.
with others or in different spaces, that's how
Great.
you and I,
Mm-hmm.
is that I was interested in a certain technology platform that I wasn't familiar with. So I joined in the group. That's where connected in with Jessica and yourself and others. And it started with conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is the opening the door for emergence and for the unforeseen, because I didn't know what to expect. So the conversations usually started with, well, tell me more about what's going on in this space,
Right.
or what's going on. And it's that sharing that you start to build sort of some a relational dynamic.
Right.
And I think I love what you said, is that the minute you join a group or participate in a group, you find out, is it for me? Is it not? Are they compatible with my thinking? Are they welcoming, etc.? But it changes your ability to go beyond just being, oh, I have to find the answer myself. No, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't find, uh, I found more than I was looking for.
Right.
And,
Right.
and, and I think that that's the cool thing.
Yeah, and I think that you just said something else is when you open yourself up to inquiry, right, and you're borrowing the benefits of movement from maybe the group that you're involved or others that are doing it, you do get unexpected support, right? And what you end up doing is, there's this tendency because we're balancing between people who are vision supporters and fixers. Because oftentimes, if we say, "Well, and I know that this has happened to me because and being 107 years old, I can speak to the many times in which I've wanted to um, be part of a movement forward with something, and I end up spending too much time and effort fixing something in the past that's broken, right? And um, it is a little challenging, and you do have to be open for that surprise. But when you flip the switch to from finding answers to staying in the question and visioning, just like you were saying, going forward with asking questions of the process and being open, there is that felt sense that a recognition of what's right came at the right time. Is that fair?
Oh yeah, and I like the connection you made with fixing, A while back, somebody said, well, if you're fixing something and you're successful, you end up with what you started off with.
Hmm.
While if you go into inquiry and you don't know where you're headed and you don't know quite what you're wanting, you end up with something new. So you end up with something that's been added or developed that was unexpected. So I think that's the magic. Fixing has its value,
Hmm.
but if you're looking to go beyond,
Well, let's talk then a little bit because I promised a good friend of mine who I know I think is watching this show this morning that we would talk about some of the things that who doesn't support because sometimes we we think that certain people have been supporting us, right? And going back into this whole idea of fixing, um, uh, I'll just toss some ideas out and see if anybody else can relate to this, right? Um, i- One of them is energy mismatches that you've tolerated. People who need you to be something you're not. Those who support your old path but are resistant to your new one.
that's a
You
good
know,
one.
well, it's just it's amazing how many times because we have our own built-in sometimes fear of change, and we also are sometimes around people that we may have energetic mismatches with who are holding us back. And it's not about, again, finding out who's wrong, trying to say, well, you know, I realize it is YouTube and we could probably swear, but it's not about necessarily identifying, and blaming, but it's beginning to recognize who doesn't support. Because um, one thing that happens for me is that I can switch into cleanup crew mode, right? Where I can identify a problem and then I'm going to go back and fix it. And then I think that's because I think by fixing what, again, isn't working, that is going to give me the support to move forward, right? And that's when you knew anyway about what you wanted to do, but you stayed because you felt obligated to what was happening before, right? And again, I invite anyone in the chat if there's anything that you'd like for us to consider, you can just toss out something. Um, I'm really glad that we're getting some real good comments here, but I think I'm still trying to figure out how to make all this work in our chat. I think one of the things, again, the timing. Thank you, Jessica, for recognizing that this is the timing spot on. Um, but one of the challenges that we run into so much when we're trying to find out who supports us is, again, we go back into that fixer mode, right? I mean, has that ever happened to you in your world, Ray, in terms of trying to fix problems rather than move forward?
Yeah, I guess it's the question of sort of keeping your awareness on a broad spectrum in the sense of looking at what is actually happening around me and what are the responses I'm getting from people that are either trying to tell me what to do or actually um, suggesting options. And I lean towards, well, give me some options. Don't tell me what to do. And what I find interesting is the minute you start looking at those, the ones who are giving you options are usually asking you more questions. They're saying, "Hey, what do you really mean by that?" Or what's making you lean into something? And I think what I liked about your question, and maybe we can ask anyone here if they're brave enough to put a comment in YouTube, is what does the support look like and feel like? Just give us a general element of what is that for you. It doesn't have to be deep. Oh, support means I get listened to, something like that.
Well, I did see one comment that did come in that's kind of along those lines, right? Which is that it's okay to respect and value and appreciate someone and not keep them close to you, right? Um, and if we begin with that sort of energy, right? Um, I want to go back to the lean in. People keep asking you questions, but are those questions pulling you back to question your own motives about. And again, it's helpful sometimes when you're deciding who supports your path forward. If I'm going off in a different direction, I do have people that I will check in with to make sure that I'm going in the right direction. And, so that there's feedback and there's inquiry, but can you use that inquiry energy to recognize if some the things that some people are questioning you about are actually holding you back or moving you forward, right? So um, I want to bring in another little comment here too. Um, how to merge the older person mental session of a newspaper: who, what, when, why. And we want to know everything about everything before we move, right? We have to have all of the facts present before we go forward. And I think that the challenge with all of that questioning process is we can get so caught up in being able to know for sure, right? There's a way of studying what, I want to have all the answers. um, I want to be able to get everything lined up before I move forward, right? And I think that that can actually be crippling in a way. I mean, that's my take on what uh, one of the person's chat comment. Do you have any thoughts about that comment, Ray?
I'm actually reading her. Whoops, hang on. A technical glitch in the software is every time I try to look at what's in the YouTube, it starts going.
Oh wait, but that gives us what was the word and phrase you used from last week about the glitch? Please share it now. It's
Uh, uh,
appropriate.
a an individual who was leading a group, and it was an international group, and all sorts of technology connections. So it started to go wrong. And he just got a smile on his face, and everybody said, "Well, why are you smiling? This isn't working." And he said, it just occurred to me that I have to embrace the glitch, live with it." And everybody kind of went, "Ah, so true,
Yeah,
so true."
yeah,
And the system stabilized, and it carried on. But in essence, he said, instead of getting angry or upset or anxious, it was about recognizing this too shall pass, or it's not the end of the world. We'll just continue whenever we can.
right, right. Well, and again, that's opening yourself up to for a different interpretation of what's happening to you. And we'll probably do it. We can devote a whole episode, I would think, in the upcoming thing about embracing the glitch, the time in which you were moving forward, but you realized that what you had to do was literally embrace the glitch as you were going forward. But back here in our question of the week, which we're really focusing on this particular topic right now, which is who supports your path forward and who doesn't. you know um, we have to look at some central ideas around this theme. We were talking a little bit about support, and you know one of the challenges with support is that oftentimes you're going to get fragments of support when you're moving. I feel a little, it's almost like Hansel and Gretel, the story. When you're moving forward, modernity wants us to have all the answers. Just what the other person was talking about before. We want to nail down all the specifics. Who's going to be there? How's it going to work? How big is it? Where's it going? What's the definite path, right? And then we want to be able to have the support that either aligns with all of that, right? Or it doesn't. But one of the things that happens in the beauty when you stay in the inquiry is these little Hansel and Gretel sized bits come on your path, you know? And as you begin to find, some people call them stepping stones. I tend to use the word breadcrumbs just because I'm a starch loving kind of guy. But I think that part of this process of recognizing that some of the people who may be ready to support you are not yet in your life, you get there by borrowing the little bits on your path as you move forward. Is that fair?
Yeah, I like the breadcrumb and the other analogies or visuals, because I'm a visual kind of guy. Is I think what what I like to sort of lean into is sensing those patterns and connecting them to get a clearer or a bigger element of the picture.
Right.
And like if and I think that's being human, is the fact that you might offer an element, one piece of what I'm thinking. Somebody else comes along and gives me another little piece, and I go, wow, now now that makes more sense because that was the missing element or the evolution of the experience or what's going on. And whoa, you got lots of comments, Jamie.
Well, let's see here. We're
Let's
a
see if
lot
we
of
can
about a.
connect. I think part of the experiment as well is how can we connect your sharing with us to the topic. And Jamie is really good at that, so I'm going to put the pressure on him.
Well, that's partially because one of the things that's important for me is to recognize we talk about what's emerging, right? So we have the basic framework. I had asked a couple of people to kind of come join me, and I said, well, we're part of what we do on this show is we really just speak to what emerges in the conversation, right? Um, I also kind of want to bring this, and so there are some things that are emerging that I want to, in addition to embracing the glitch here. Um, this is the idea of the spectrum of support, right? And is finding where you can gather your power to personally move forward. There aren't always um, one solid source. There are those, and recognizing that there is this spectrum. Modernity wants us to have binary answers, pro and con. You're either with me or against me, right? But when you're really looking at your own life holistically, you're identifying the spectrum of support. That goes back to one of the things that Jessica was saying is I can borrow a great deal of support from people who may not always be near to me at a particular point in time. Does that make sense? So we get this opportunity every day to recognize, that there is this spectrum of the support. I love that term. I mean, almost as much as I love embrace the glitch. And this is a perfect example of what we try to embody in this particular gathering, which is these wonderful little tidbits that emerge from it. So thank you for that. And as we continue to have this conversation about who supports your path forward, recognizing that there is, and I'm going to say this something else. There, oftentimes we'll go read a book about finding support, right? But the challenge with support is, eh, we've talked about this. You'll learn the Joe Blow method of how to win friends and influence people, or how to find support. And it's great to be able to study methods and whatever, but it's your path, right? Who supports your path forward? And part of understanding that that's still your path. You don't want to walk someone else's journey, because if you're walking someone else's journey and you're looking for answers that say, well, I wanted to get from point A to point B, so I'm going to study what Ray did to get from point A to point B, and I'm going to copy everything that Ray did. That may be interesting. That may be an interesting experiment. I'm going to try the Ray Guillot method of, life advancement, but you're going to be missing the magic of all of those little things that
Yeah.
show up in your life as you move forward, right?
Yeah, the other thing of this experiment, which is really fun, is in groups. Is one of the sessions I attended, which was it was a group of visual communicators, and one of them said he developed imagery to create stories, and he said, pay close attention to the language you use and the metaphors you use, because that's your brain trying to make sense and create an image that you can recall or share with somebody else. So when the term spectrum comes up, and he said, okay, so what does that mean for you or the people listening? And generally, what happens, somebody says, spectrum is good. I use or I refer to another, and then all of a sudden, the richness of the conversation starts to deepen, because then you start to say, well, look at what we have in common.
Mm-hmm.
Look how we're deepening the
Mm-hmm.
thinking and the sharing. And I think that's the
Mm-hmm.
key thing, is any
Mm-hmm.
conversation, the value of any conversation is not just the fact that Jamie said X, Ray said Y, uh, some Jessica said Z, and it's what did they actually share, and what was the shape or the result of that exchange. And I think it's I think that the term that you came up with a little while ago is an exchange of resource or a relational exchange. That's where the magic is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. And the challenges that we run into when we are getting all of that information from the spectrum again is to make sure that not only do we not follow somebody else's path forward, right? But we begin to sort of recognize how important it is for us to um, stay informed as we go through the experiment, right? To continue to let it evolve, because right now, especially when there is so much brokenness going on in the world right now, we can act out of this wound of like, I have no idea how I'm going to get out of this situation. I don't know who is going to be my support. And what we tend to do, as we've talked about earlier, we can fall victim to trying to fix it, right? We can call because modernity has already told us that the solution when things aren't working is to just do something different. And you can hear all of the cliches, the geographic fix, well, I'm just going to change everything. I'm going to do none of these people are helping me. No one's supporting me on my path. I'm just going to jettison all of this and just change it, right? Um, but to be able to have that courage to be able to say, all right, I'm going to take this little bit of information from here. I'm going to put this little bit of information from here. I'm going to take this little bit of information from here. And I'm going to work with people who have that same sort of resonant core that I do. And we're going to be able to kind of assemble something as we move forward. Is that fair?
Oh yeah, the I heard a really interesting analogy when I was looking at some research material, and it's an indigenous person, and she was basically saying, he said, "What can we learn from this, and what does it mean for us?" And he says, "It's a Western thing. There's a blizzard on the prairie." And she says, domestic cattle will run away from the blizzard. They'll run where the wind is
Mm-hmm.
going away. So they're looking to avoid the blizzard. The indigenous animal, the buffalo, actually turns and faces the storm and heads into it. And of course, they're biologically designed. That's why they have that big woolly fur thing in the front of their bodies. And the interest was, so she summed it up to say, by avoiding the storm, you drag it forward with you. You never escape it. By leaning into it, the storm goes past you.
That's right.
So that was kind of an interesting analogy to trigger or to catalyze a bit of a discussion that she was having in her research paper. And I went, wow, there's the analogy, there's the
Mm-hmm.
visual, there's the thing to think into
Mm-hmm.
or to deepen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so beautifully said because you look to all of that resistance. Not only do you have again this you may have there's a term that a lot of people toss around a lot. It's called sacred contracts, right? The idea that a sacred contract may be completed, right? And there's a difference between ending things badly and ending things with a complete conscious awareness of what's happening, right? And so, right, and I can't believe I'm using a buffalo analogy here, but here we are right now. You can, and I think that there's a part of us in our biology that is designed to do that. I'm going to have to go forward I'm going to go into the resistance. I'm going to make this hard. This has got to be difficult. Because essentially you're still honoring the wound. You're leaning into the fact that you don't have an answer, as opposed to, wait a second, what if I open myself up to what's possible as I look in the road ahead? I may not know who is walking forward with me, but I've been able to ask myself enough questions to get that clarity that gives me that freedom. And until I can really find that way, I'm not going to be the buffalo. I'm going to build on this metaphor in somewhere, but you know, it we don't want to be that thing that drags ourselves into the future, right? That's not that's not really consciously looking at what needs to be ending. That's pulling away, right? And if you don't want to pull away, some people will try to lug it forward into their future. They will, again, end things badly. The focus will be on the damage that's left behind. I don't want to spend too much time in this, but I think the fact that you've gone into buffalo analogies, and we can talk about some of that. And again, if you those of you who are watching us in the chat, it's great that you're here, and you can join in the conversation at any time by giving us or adding to the conversation, because that's one of the things that I think is really important. What emerges in a conversation is what you bring to it, right? The people who are in the chat, the people who are watching us, you are the value added reason of why we're going live with this conversation, right? We want to be able to um, uh, talk about these topics in a way that we know that whenever you open yourselves up for a discussion and an inquiry, there's going to be things that emerge, things that you understand, different perspectives that you have. You may even have your own buffalo story, just like Ray did. But and again, I think all of this is really, really important whenever we're talking about because there's all those wonderful cliches we can follow, right? Which is, you're going to have to go this alone. You're going to have to go this alone. And even though you are moving forward into your own future and setting that determination, by staying open to inquiry, you're able to look around you to see what may be new that is in. And I knew there would be somebody to do "Give Me a Home on the Range" here with the Buffalo Roam, right? Um, but I think it's very true that one of the things that is so important is to look at the messaging you receive, the messaging that you've been conditioned to when you do decide to move forward. And that's oftentimes what keeps us, in relationships that don't serve us anymore, right? Or in situations, because that pull is so strong, right? And the narratives that we've bought into about how we move on from that. What if you did say to yourself, I had this sacred contract with this individual. That contract's been fulfilled. If Ray and I want to negotiate a new contract of what comes forward, that's great. I'm open to negotiations with Ray about what our relationship will look like as we move forward. But if Ray isn't interested in negotiating new terms,
Yeah.
right, we're not necessarily going to be able to move forward. I'm just going to be acting out of patterns that were from the past. And I may then just be in oppositional energy, right, to some of these things that have been in our lives. So, yes, here's a wonderful thing: staying in inquiry.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was touched on in this discussion, and there's an underlying factor, is our mental models or worldviews. So this is likely where a lot of tension and conflict comes into play. Because if you're looking at experimenting and looking for the new, what's emerging, those who want to maintain the status quo, the existing, will either feel threatened or feel that you're going in the wrong direction. So that's where it starts to get interesting, or uh, a different situation is to say, okay, so my view of the world is different than your worldview. Now, what you just said so well, Jamie, is okay, maybe we can't continue because of that. But the other element I think that we had in conversations this week is maybe the time is not now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a question of when, keep it open
Mm-hmm.
to when the time will be appropriate, or if there's a shift or change in mental model or worldview, or a change in something that creates a new learning that wasn't there before. So it's timing plays a big part.
It does. It does. And, that's why this time of year is really central to that, right? Because when you recognize that there is a yes, no, and a not now to whatever's emerging in your life, again, it goes back to finding out what that compass is for you and not borrowing. Again, you can borrow the benefits of someone else's method, right? Um, but that's where the grief aspect of going back to our central question. And again, I'm just want to just reflect back for some people who are maybe here. What we're talking about this week is who supports your path forward and who doesn't. And part of the way in which we work in this particular broadcast is your comments and things that you put in the chat are integral to our discussion. Um, and so as we have this conversation about that, we've been touching on a lot of ideas. But one of the things that Ray and I like to be able to do with this conversation is to see what emerges for you, because again, um, this isn't about giving you answers. This is about providing an opportunity for you to see what emerges as we have these conversations. Um, I also love this comment that came in the chat. The storm is also personal and public. So grabbing a hand to help you stand in the storm and letting go to move forward when the wind is calm is part of the process, right?
It's what
And
I just love just interjecting, Jamie, just say that it's not binary in the sense of it's not it's not either or, it's yes and.
mhm,
It's both at the same time. So you're grabbing a hand to be able to weather the storm, but you have to know when, what is actually happening in the process is what I'm
correct,
trying to say.
correct. And anyone who knows me well knows that eventually, in whenever you get together with me, there will always be every great truth is always revealed through musical theater, right? And I realize that there's a big and very popular movie out there that's right now, which is that some people are for chapters, not whole books, right? Um, and when you are looking at closing the books on the relationship, can you actually have that conversation that my life has been changed for good? Look at what you're grateful for, who has gotten you to this particular journey, that some of the relationships that went south, some of the things that ended, were there to sort of help give you the fuel to help you move forward. You got to see the contrast, and you're recognizing that conscious ending, that chapter, that ability to close the book on what you've been through, um, is part of making sure that you don't drag things into the future, right, that have already been fulfilled. And, you know, um, it's almost like being an energetic hoarder. Does that make sense? Ray, a lot of people, things are very heavy because they hold on to things in their world. And some people, that's how they find their way, is by having markers from their past, things around them that bring them comfort. I'm not, everybody has their own different style, right? But the difference is can you consciously choose whether or not the energy of something that you're hanging on to is serving you as you move forward? And just being able to have the courage to ask yourself that question, right, unleashes an inquiry, and you get a chance to emerge from it. And if you can find anything, um, you can find how that support that is done was support for that part of the journey.
Yeah, I love your reference to symbol, because so many things that we do in life, objects become symbols for emotions and feelings. And some of the TV that I watch is interesting, is where they explore not the object but the symbol of the object. What does it represent? Are you willing to let that go?
Right,
It says, do
right,
you need it? Do you want it? Do you love it?
right.
And it's fun to sort of go, well, the minute you talk about it, it actually is changing your thinking pattern.
Mm-hmm. Something that's just come up and has just emerged in the conversation is, and Ray, this kind of feeds into something that you talk a lot about. We get stuck in metaphor a lot, and when we use words, what does support really mean? The definition of support means something different for you than it does for me, right? And so that's why it's really, there is no right answer, right? To some of what is we've talked about support, but it is trying to find out. My support from Ray is different from my support from the gentleman that I walk with in the gym, right? And so it's okay having different levels of support. um, it's also okay as you're moving forward and you're looking at who supports your path. There may be things that you check in with certain individuals that you don't run by others. If some of you will recognize this because I shared this story earlier. One of the guys that I walk with in the gym is it's not the best thing in the world, right? We want to. Some people are there to help troubleshoot our ideas, right? Other people are there to lift them up, and it's recognizing who in your life offers you that level of support, right? But if you have to say support for every individual in my life is 100%, you have to buy into everything that I'm doing. You must always be there giving me applause, doing everything. You're setting yourself up for a very dysfunctional future, right?
Yeah, I like what Jessica was saying, and what you elaborated on, Jamie, is what we're really doing, indirectly and directly in some cases, is co-creating meaning
Mm-hmm.
together. So if the word support isn't the right word and you use another word, as long as I understand what you mean or what you're trying to create with a word, it doesn't matter. Like at the end of the call is in some of the sessions I've attended with Jamie and others, is we start off with one word and at the end we've changed the word because we've co-created the meaning, and the next time Jamie uses that word, I really understand what he's getting at, and that's magic. That's incredible because um, he's taken the time to say, well, support means this to me, and I go,
Right.
I never used it that way before.
Well, and I think that what we're clearly looking for is that you have to be clear on what identifying what the support that you need. Like I was saying, one of my oldest friends that I walk with at the gym is the greatest person when I don't understand something complex for me to run it by him, right? And there are other friends that I have that are really good for other things. So this builds on something that Jessica just added to the chat, which is there are no wrong answers, right? What there are, however, are wrong questions to the wrong people. And again, we fall back into the cliche, you can't get blood from a turnip, those type of things. But if you're looking, or that very famous joke, I lost a dollar bill and somebody else is helping somebody else find the dollar bill. And they said, well, where did you lose it? And I said, well, I lost it over there, but the light's better over here. Right. And I think I just delivered my first dad joke in this, right? Um, but but there's truth in that because there are no wrong answers. There's just feedback. But are you going with the right questions? If I bring the question of will you support me on my journey as I move forward? Um, if you're not clear on what that support means to you and recognizing that, well, this person can support you in this particular way, right? This other person can support you in this other way. This other person who you thought was your support maybe needs to be left back over here, right? Um, but this brings in this wonderful question, Ray. What would you answer this? How would you answer this question?
That's interesting. Support defined by the transition in progress. Hmm. I need time to process that.
No, no, dang it. This is
No,
live. You have to modernity says, give me the answer.
well, how come I don't have the answer? What's wrong with me?
That's right. What's
I
wrong
must
with
be
you?
deficient some way.
That's right. Let's all aid to the, clap really but that's a wonderful question. Um, you
And
know,
look what it does is that I don't have the answer, but I'm interested in exploring it.
mhm,
Like, what does that mean to whoever just shared that?
yeah. Yeah, no, it's beautiful because again, some support that you receive may not be beneficial for you, right? You know, I cannot tell you, I mean, donuts are great things, but if I'm around somebody who's offering me donuts every day, um, you know, that may not be the support that I need. And I don't mean to always bring things down to a humorous level, but I do really And one of the things I'm going to have to remind myself to do next week is to turn off the, ladies and gentlemen, please silence the devices that are near you. So if we are recognizing that the beauty of the question that's just being asked is being able to see yourself in transition is a part of then being able to um, see what is emerging. So therefore, the question itself is healthy, right? Because if we don't look at ourselves, right, if we don't see ourselves in transition, we will see ourselves stuck in a rabbit hole, doing whatever needs to, doing whatever else needs to emerge and defining it, fixing it, calling it bad, calling it's wrong. And um, instead of taking this wonderful inquiry question that we had for the week, which is who supports your path forward and who doesn't, modernity would like for you to come up with a quiz and be able to show who supported your path forward and who doesn't, evaluate it, problem solve it. Um, Instead of using this as an inquiry question, it'll use it as some kind of evidence of how you made things wrong or bad and didn't work. It'll be the defining way in which you look backwards and say, what did I do wrong? Who was there to blame? All of the stuff that isn't necessary, right? Because if we go back to that same central question that we were just asked seconds ago, which is, it's a transition in progress. Support is there to help the transition in progress. Maybe that is just the best way of looking at it. And then making sure that there is a conscious level of support. And when you're conscious with what that support is, when you're conscious of the transition that you're helping, then maybe that support then emerges in a much more healthy way. I don't know, Ray, does that
I,
cause anything to emerge in you?
I got distracted by the comments in YouTube because I was thinking rabbit hole, and it twisted my mind to think in terms of please call our support line. Our operators are all busy at the moment, but your call is important to us. Please wait. 2 hours later, you get disconnected because they've overloaded the system. So support has the term support has been co-opted or weaponized to mean we care, but we don't care that much. Sorry,
um,
I distract.
Well, that's as another friend of mine says, is that customer care now sometimes is customer care is we don't care, right? They should just call it customer we don't care,
Yeah.
so, or we'll turn it over to a bot in some way, shape, or form.
And if
Well,
I can just add one last
yeah.
comment, that my wife, who worked at a bank, said that the staff, because the staff were supposed to provide customer support, but they were given directives that didn't allow them to do customer support. So just mentally, they were playing games with them. This is where uh, service is just a word.
Oh,
So
really?
so we won't do anything about it, but we're going to do service. And the other was um, we care, but not if it costs money.
Right. Right. And it's interesting that, when we first put this question out, the idea of who supports your path forward and who doesn't, my mind instantly went to the frame of that particular question. But it's wonderful that what emerged as part of this conversation is what's the definition of support? Because some people can offer contribution. That contribution may be a lack of support, right? The feedback loop that you're looking for. And that's what I love this particular process because again, support is a word that is often laden, right? With um, different, like Jessica was saying earlier, was with different definitions of it, and we have to begin to really examine what our questions about or what our definitions of support is, because as we're going forward into our lives, especially for those of us who are over the age of, I don't know, 10. Is that how we're doing? Those of us who are older than 12, those of us who are of a certain age, we can really slip into, and we'll talk about this in another episode, the three the three guards of Hades, which are worry, clutch, and grab. if we get panicked about something, we'll worry about it. We'll grab at things, and we'll just hang on to them, right? And we won't be open to new avenues of support. We don't open up ourselves for a different understanding of it. So I don't know how you feel, Ray, but I'm very grateful that the conversation ended, or has evolved, has emerged. And just as someone has said right now in the chat as well, um, support is a verb and a noun. It's an action that we can offer. It's also a noun to see the quantitative part of what it is. What is that? What is the amount of support? What does that really look like? What does the color blue mean to you? But just knowing that you can ask these questions as you're on your journey helps you with that correct closing sequence. Before you even begin to overlay anything else into what you're looking for as a new venture, the thing that we've been inviting in this particular month and the thing that we'll continue with next week is looking at the correct closing techniques. That we didn't want to buy into this whole analogy is that just because the calendar said December 31st, you have to have this wonderful list of things ready. And if you don't fulfill all of those things in the next, what are we at, January 11th, right? That you somehow failed, right? All of that pressure. So what we want to invite people back for in our next inquiry is to be with us for this discussion, right? To participate in this journey of to see what's emerging. And it emerges, I'm hoping that those of you who are with us in the chat recognize that that's what this process live is all about, right? There isn't anything more true than what's emerged from our conversations. So what you take away from this is what emerged for you. And if you do want to have a conversation, we're going to be setting up some ways in which we can kind of get together and talk about these off broadcast that we'll start incorporating into the programming format as we move forward. In the meantime, between now and then, were there any closing comments that you wanted to offer up?
I just wanted to encourage, much as you've done, Jamie, is encourage people to think in terms of what should be the next question. What you're doing really well, Jamie, is you're connecting, and you just explained it from the first session to this session. So we want to connect the thinking that it's not separate events. This is one long conversation that's evolving. So what
Right.
you add to it, or what question, and that's the experiment, is if somebody says, hey, I want to talk about this, then the challenge is, how does that fit in with what we've already done,
Mm-hmm.
or what we want to do, or
Mm-hmm.
where we're going, or
Mm-hmm.
what makes sense of it? So it's the co-creative sense making again. So yes,
Mm-hmm.
please, any feedback or ideas,
Right.
and carry on with your masterful question development.
Well, and I think so here's the invitation that I want to extend to anyone who is watching this live or is listening to the recording is there's an email address that you'll find on our YouTube page, which is riseandshinesundays@gmail.com. If you have some thoughts about what you'd like to see our topic, or even threads, even ideas, right? Even, as I will say, breadcrumbs, to borrow back from the analogy that we talked about, this, that support. There's no definition on how you can support us. However you want to support us, your participation in the conversation is wonderful. Ideas and suggestions are wonderful. Email us at riseandshinesundays@gmail.com. Leave a thumbs up if you'd like on this particular episode. But we really are so very grateful for your participation in all of this. As somebody just said that uh, I love this comment here, because um, we want to have different amounts of salt and pepper, and even turmeric every now and then, and cinnamon. Who knows? We'll just be able to put all the different spices into the conversation, because that's what we're putting together. So, in the time remaining, I want to thank Jessica Dugas and the Breakthrough Show Network for hosting us. We'll be back next week. And thank you all for joining us. It has been a wonderful emergence with you. And thank you, Ray.
And thank you, Jamie, and our participants.
Whoop. And I forgot to say, coming up next on the Breakthrough Show Network is Spirit Sundays. Stick around.